Hey folks, Wild Philosophy here. Apologies for the absence yesterday, but things came up. So today, contrary to what we were saying, I figured we would briefly discuss The Wizard of Oz. Now, I'm going to spare a plot recap or discussion of this one. I think everyone is familiar with the basic plot of The Wizard of Oz, and I will refrain my commentary to saying that the actual Wizard of Oz, the movie Wizard of Oz, which you're probably familiar with, actually cuts out the last, must be fifth of the book. In the book itself, it is not the Good Witch of the North, Glinda, who meets her after she kills the Witch of the East. It's the Witch of the South. And so, after they dispose of the Witch of the West, and the Lion, the Tin Man, and the Scarecrow get what they want, and the Wizard of Oz flies away, Dorothy has to find the Witch of the North. Now, for those not familiar with the writing of The Wizard of Oz, Frank L. Baum wrote it for the very specific reason of creating a fairy tale devoid of nightmares, to use his exact word. Now, for those who are wondering, Frank L. Baum thus aimed to divest his stories of violence, nastiness. Later Oz books said that death was impossible in the land of Oz, which was basically portrayed as a Garden of Eden. And for those who are wondering, like, if it often gets blamed as a continuation of, like, Victorian ethics, which is kind of laughable, because in spite of the Victorian era's awful reputation for children's literature, they actually had pretty... Like, they were willing to give children crap that we would be terrified to give anyone under the age of 14 today. George MacDonald, for instance, George MacDonald would casually drop words like excogitate in novels like The Princess and Curdie. His literature was often labeled filled with death, people suffering horrible tribulations. Lewis Carroll, of course, is well known for some of the vivid imagery in his novels. You then have The Water Babies, which is a pretty transparent attack on a lot of Victorian values, and would have been mostly intelligible to the kids reading it. Comparatively, it's in the early modernist area where you get the impression, and admittedly it has, like, you have proto-Victorian ideas working in the background here, where you get the impression that ignore me. You get the idea that children are innocent, but they're too innocent to be able to understand evil. And moreover, that by removing evil from children's education, we will prevent them from doing evil later on. And this became very well fused into our books. For people who think we rejected it with the 60s, our children's... The stuff we give to children today is even more puritanical than Baum's writings were. In fact, it's often more simplistic too. It was customary during those periods to give fairly young children chapter books, thus the aforementioned MacDonald, Carroll, Kingsley, and even on into the 30s and 40s and 60s with Madeleine L'Engle's A Wrinkle in Time, Mary Norton's Borrowers, E.T.A. Hoffman's The Nutcracker, which was written in the 1820s, but And in these days, as you well know, most of our children's books are 20 to 30 pages and do not tend to go beyond monosyllabic words. And this continues until they're 6 or 7 years old, and we give them books like Geronimo Stilton, which I enjoyed as a kid, but it's hardly meaty fare, shall we say, compared to what kids could read based on what they did read in the past. Now, I've given an extensive preamble to The Wizard of Oz. People, of course, might take umbrage with the way I've chosen to categorize literature. They might find Victorian literature more saccharine, I can never keep the pronunciation straight, than I'm presenting it. They might also try and argue that our modern literature has not degraded, which a claim latter I'm willing to give on the former claim, but the latter is fairly laughable, given that it was purposefully derived to infantilize our children and by extension our adults, by divesting from them the notion to grasp complex ideas. Something which most of the people who wrote these things were more than happy to admit. But I've gone through this extensive preamble because the chief and greatest virtue of The Wizard of Oz, other than the fact that Frank L. Baum was undoubtedly one of the finest authors of the last century, is the fact that he utterly failed at divesting it of nightmares. So, there are 86 confirmed deaths in The Wizard of Oz, not accounting for one swarm of bees, who obviously could not be numerically determined. I can actually, for people who are sitting there going, 86, it's the Witch of the East, who's crushed, then 2 giant hideous bear things, I think they're called kakiris, but it's been a month since I read the book, who are killed by the Cowardly Lion, so that's 3 deaths if you're counting. Then the Tin Woodsman decapitates a lynx, bringing our death total up to 4. Then on their way to fight the Wicked Witch of the West, the Tin Woodsman decapitates 40 wolves, bringing our death total up to 44. The Scarecrow throttles to death another 40 birds, bringing our death total up to 84. And the Tin Woodsman then proceeds to murder the swarm of bees. They then proceed to kill the Wicked Witch of the West with a bucket of water, bringing our total up to 85 and 1 swarm of bees. And on their way to find Glinda the Good, the Cowardly Lion kills a giant spider the size of a house. So, 86 deaths. Something like a third of the book is spent in or around the keep of an evil witch who enslaves and kills her opponents. So it's not, he's not describing like severed limbs and hordes of blood. Well, actually, something like 41, 42 decapitations. So we can debate that. And as a consequence, as of what may charitably be called Frank L. Baum's gross failure in divesting The Wizard of Oz of violence, his novel is actually excellent. It's a wonderful novel, especially, of course, for children. Perfect perfect tension, tingle, even though there's not reams of blood and organs flying everywhere, it is pretty tense at some point. Although, because it's a children's novel, everything will turn out okay. That's something children's writers of all ages have kept in common. And yeah, I highly recommend this book. You can find it for free anywhere. I suspect Frank L. Baum was criticized for this violence by his contemporaries. Certainly G.K. Chesterton accused him of founding New Puritanism and said that it was worse than the old Puritanism, because at least the old Puritanism had let you read fairy tales. But I imagine that Baum listened to the people who he agreed with, because I have not read the second book yet, but I've read The Scarecrow of Oz, which is the 8th in the series, and nobody dies in that one. In fact, nobody can die. Some guy gets crushed under a ton of rocks in a pond, and he keeps breathing for decades. It's very impressive. Anywho, this has been Wild Philosophy. Tune in next time to hear as we talk about either the Nutcracker or the Borrowers. I wish you all a wonderful, wonderful day, and keep safe, keep free of corona, and read a book.